Okay, this is the probably long-awaited lesson on vocab stories. I know it's said that this was coming soon. It's said that for over a year now, but I finally got a chance to sit down and go over this with you guys. Now we go over this in class several times, but it's always nice, I think, to have this option if you are at home and you want a reminder, or maybe you have someone that is helping you and they would like an idea of what the vocab story is all about. They can check this out and maybe give you a hand. So, this will be just a run through example of how to write a vocab story and what it is, why we use them in English. And this is mostly, I guess, for the junior high, 7th, 8th grade, but nothing really changes except for the number of words once you get into high school. The difference is you've been doing this for a few years, so by the time you're a freshman, you should really have a pretty good grasp on this. So what I chose was 5 words that could potentially be vocabulary in, say, the 7th grade, maybe the 8th grade. I chose 5 because in 7th grade, that's how many you are required to use in your vocab story. Now, in 7th, 8th grade, you have 10 vocabulary words, which you'll be tested on, but you only need to use 5 in your story. Well, before we actually get into writing the story, I want to talk about grading a little bit. How this grading system works. Vocab tests are a test. So what that means is, based on what we talk about at the beginning of the year, these are worth, in a category weighting system, 35% of your overall grade when you combine all of your tests together. It's 35%. So if you're not doing well on your vocab tests or maybe your reading tests, if it goes in as a test, this is a big chunk of your grade. So you definitely want to make sure that you are prepared for tests whenever you can be. Studying, practicing, group practice is always a good thing. But vocab tests are one part of that. We do a lot of vocabulary, so I want to make sure that everyone knows how to do this. Now, that being said, when you take a vocab test in English, it's actually broken into 2 parts. There's a written test, and there is the vocab story. So, as you can see, there's 2 parts, so this is a 50-50 relationship. Together, these 2 parts make up your test grade when you take a vocabulary test. Don't get confused by the 35 and the 250s. This is your overall percentage grade. This talks about your individual test. So when you take a test on Friday in vocabulary, how you do, what grade you get, depends on how well you did on the written test and how well you did on the vocab story. The cool thing is you have at least, in junior high, at least 1 whole week to get your vocab story done. Okay, I always give you your words on a Monday, and if I don't, I make sure that we have enough time to get this finished, so the test might be bumped up to the following week. And this written test is almost always on a Friday. So this will, look something like multiple choice, finding definitions, matching them with the words. It also includes a bit of grammar, which increases as the year goes on. Some people say, well, why is this a vocab test if we're adding grammar in there? Well, grammar is one of those things that finds its way into everything. So I try and incorporate your grammar lessons, your grammar grading into your writing, into your vocabulary. When we do peer editing of other people's work, we talk about grammar. So it kind of shows up everywhere. the majority of this test will be dealing with your vocab words that you receive on Monday. So, the other cool thing is since you get your words on Monday and the test is on Friday, your vocab story should all be ready to go by that written test. You get to use this on the test. Now, I don't like the word cheat sheet, but essentially what this is a really good cheat sheet. I don't know. It's a tool that you can use to help you remember some of these definitions on the test. Now, in 7th grade, you're required to do 5. Can you do all 10? Absolutely. Are you going to get bonus points? No. But is that a way to, again, assist you on the written test? Absolutely. If you're using the words in context with your story, it's going to help you on this written portion of the test. There is one rule in your story. You're not allowed to just write down the definitions. You can't, say the definition for splendid is, and then write that down. Well, that's a little too far for cheating. There is a word here that is important, and it is story. We are going to create a story, so this is part of our writing as well. And I guess there's 2 rules. I have had students, in order to get all of their words done quickly, especially in the high school, where you're required to do up to 20 sometimes. You can't just write this week's vocabulary story consists of the words and then just list all the words after that. Just using them in that way is not allowed. And if you think about it, there is no context for you. There's no point in writing that story. It's not going to help you in the written test because it doesn't provide you with any context. So, just to recap here, grading system. All of your tests account for a big portion of your overall grade in the class. Your vocab test is comprised of 2 parts. 50% is a written test, and then 50% is your vocab story, which helps you on the written test. So, I try and stress to students, what happens if you don't do your vocab stories? Because students tend to look at this as, oh, it's just an extra. It's a way, it's like a practice for me. I don't have to do it. No, you do, because it counts for 50%. If you got 100 on your written test, that means you know all of those words, or you guessed really well. But chances are you know all of those words, but then you didn't do your vocab story. What's the best grade you can get? Take 50% off, and you're left with a 50. That's an F. Don't do that to yourself. Okay? If you know all the words, do your vocab story. Earn that 100% completely. Okay. I'm going to just kind of keep these words off to the right here, and we'll start our vocab story on a different piece of paper. Important thing, students ask me, and you figure this out as the year goes on, because I kind of remind you, do I need a title? Yeah, this is a story. Everything should have a title, even if you were turning in an essay or a short essay. It should have a title. It's just a part of writing. It's one more aspect that you can add into your work as a writer. Now, not always, but one thing you can do is look at your words before you start. Caution, embroidered, indomitable, alarming, and splendid. Sometimes, looking at them and just thinking about it for a while will give you an idea of what kind of theme or direction you want your story to go in, or maybe a better way to put it would be that makes sense for your story to go in. That's going to make it easier for you to write a story with those words. Right off the bat, I know these words, and I'm thinking this kind of sounds like maybe a fantasy hero type story. where someone needs to take caution, where they may have a patch embroidered on a vest or a piece of armor. Indomitable sounds like something that you know maybe the hero is indomitable, or there's a dangerous villain that is indomitable, which is going to be defeated by the villain. Something is going to be alarming in this story, and then there's an ending, a splendid ending. I can fix these and use them any way that I want to in the end, but sometimes looking that over first and thinking about it before you just jump into writing is a good way to make a plan. Now the hard part is, okay, how do I do that if I don't know the words? Well, that's why we do these vocab stories. That's why we also have tools to assist us in this process. Before you take your test and before Friday comes and you use your vocab story, you will be doing definitions as well. So you're going to have to go ahead and learn these definitions in somewhat of an old-fashioned way. You don't have to use a dictionary, a hard book cover dictionary. You can use a computer. But you have to try and understand those definitions before you can use them in the correct context as well. So, this does become a bit of a process, and that's with everything. Everything is a learning process. You look it up, you don't understand it, what do? You ask the teacher. I can help you figure out and understand what these words mean. You'll also see that I have included, again, parts of speech on the side. Well, I told you eventually there's going to be some kind of grammar added into your vocab tests. Well, when we get our words, we will be going over these in class and reviewing. So it's not just like this is being thrown into the test as well. It's everything you should be prepared for before you actually have to take that test. Okay, so now with that said, I'm going to look at these words and I want to write a story. Well, stories have characters and they have plots. There's some sort of series of events that needs to take place, and I think I've already mentioned the direction I'm going to go here with kind of a hero story. So let's come up with a name for our hero. I'm not going to be real clever here. Let's use Gandalf. What is Gandalf going to do? Well, let's throw our readers into a moment of suspense, and I'm going to use just the first word here. I'm going to kind of try them in order. Let's see. Gandalf took great caution as he, what's a good word for walked quietly? Shuffled? I don't know, that almost sounds loud. I might come back to that with a little star here since this is a draft. As he shuffled through the dungeon. Now, I want you to take notice of my indentation here. This is something students, miss quite often. Now, one of the rules with vocab stories is every time you use one of the words, you are going to either highlight it or you are going to underline it. And that just helps me as we go through the stories identify where your words are. So I'm a big fan of writing and then rereading, and then if I need to do any editing, I can kind of wait till the end, and I'm going to proofread always before I turn in that final draft. Gandalf took great caution as he shuffled through the dungeon. Now my next word on the list is embroidered. I don't have to use it right away. This is a story. I can use it anywhere I want. So what happened next? We're working with suspense, so he could hear slithering in the darkness behind him. He was feeling uneasy about his predicament. Okay. Luckily, I'm just always thinking about how can I add in this word. Okay, I know the word embroidered means to be kind of attached to, usually it's some sort of patch that is attached to an article of clothing. And I know Gandalf wears a cloak at times. So, luckily, he had his special invisibility patch embroidered to his robe before he left on this journey. Okay. And again, embroidered is here, so I'm going to highlight that. I'll underline it again. Either or is fine. I like the highlighting better. If you type them, it's easy to do. You can bold them as long as they show up. Okay. Next word on the list is indomitable. Okay. Well, we were building up the suspense. Let's throw our character into the action. Good transition word. Suddenly. The indomitable, and I know this is an adjective, so it needs to describe something. The indomitable beast, known as, let's throw a word out from Lord of the Rings, Gothmog. You can come up with any name you want. I'm just kind of being quick here. Suddenly, the indomitable beast known as Gothmog lurched forward out of the crevasse, if you say it fancy. Crevice. Just a big hole, really. I could have used the word abyss. Sounds almost better, actually. I might change that later, so I'll make a little note there for myself. Alarming is my next word. Sounds like it fits perfectly into the story. And I'm going to show you this now. Gandalf was deeply alarmed by this creature's presence. Okay? Now, alarmed is not the word that was on the list. The word was alarming. However, it is a form of the word, and this is something else that we talk about often. Words change forms, and sometimes they're going to change our parts of speech. So if you look at the word alarming, you'll notice that it could be a verb, depending on its usage in context, or it could be an adjective. I could say something like, the storm was very alarming. Alarming is describing the storm. Or I can use it as a verb. The siren was alarming the people to get out. Okay, something is happening. It's doing something. So now it's a verb. However, you got to be careful because these words can change form as well. Alarming can become alarmed, and that's just common usage. And most of the time, we know these things. We use them in our everyday speech all the time. But how does that change then our parts of speech? Well, in this case, alarmed, again, is going back to describe how Gandalf was feeling. So this is an adjective again. Okay? Just try and be aware of those subtle little changes. Often we'll talk about that in class. Embroidered could be a verb or an adjective. I'm not really sure off the top of my head how it could be changed. Caution sounds like it's pretty much where it's at. Indomitable sounds pretty close. I'm thinking, if we get rid of the IN and make it dominable, you have words like dominate, put ER at the end of words often, and that'll change things into, say, a noun. Alarming, we talked about. Splendid. That one sounds pretty where it should be as well, which is our other word right now. But I don't want to use it right away because then my story is, it feels like it should be over. Doesn't have to be. Just because you finished your words out doesn't mean that you have to end the story. Sometimes I'll get vocab stories that are like that. Students will get to that last word and then they just kill off their characters right away. There was a funny one a couple years ago about this boy who had befriended a bear, and it was actually a really, heartwarming, wonderful story. And then the last word was used, and the bear just ate, like, little John or something, and like, wait a minute, they were best friends. Why would he eat little John? That doesn't make sense. Okay. So think about how your story should end. So since I'm kind of in that position, I'm going to go back and reread. It doesn't take me long. Gandalf took great caution as he shuffled through the dungeon. He could hear slithering in the darkness behind him. He was feeling uneasy about his predicament. Luckily, he had his special invisibility patch embroidered to his robe before he left on this journey. Suddenly, the indomitable beast known as Gothmog lurched forward out of the crevice. Gandalf was deeply alarmed by this creature's presence. Okay? Now, just by rereading, it reminded me that he was wearing an invisibility patch, something I had forgotten given all the talking and thinking I was doing. So that's going to kind of guide my story. But not a real good transition here. Think about that later. Since he knew the beast was unaware of his presence, I used presence already. Again, not worried about it the first time through. I can go back and change these little things later once I get my story done. But since he knew the beast was unaware of his presence, he stood still until the time was right. Gothmog could not see Gandalf in the darkness. This feels like it needs an adjective right here. Or not an adjective, an adverb. Like, what kind of darkness? No, that would be an adjective. In the deepening darkness. I might add that in later. But he could smell something in the air. Kind of like the Jack and the Beanstalk story here. Without notice, Gandalf, we used the word lurched before, let's go with leapt out with his staff and sent a splendid brilliance of light out, blinding the giant beast. Okay, splendid is my fifth word. I can see that real quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did the fifth one go? I didn't highlight it. What was it? It was alarming, indomitable. That's the one I missed. Right here. Okay. Gandalf leapt out with his staff and sent a splendid brilliance of light out, blinding the giant beast. Gothmog, comma, caught by surprise, comma, oops, running out of room, caught by surprise, comma, fell, nope, stumbled backwards, tripping back into the deep abyss. Something don't look right about that spelling either. Okay. For now, Gandalf was safe. Okay? Now, not a real long story, but actually this would be great, at the 7th, 8th grade level. I would go back now, change my title to something that, isn't just title. I made these little notes as I went along. I didn't worry about them as I was writing, but I made little notes to myself, this little star that I might want to change this word. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those, I think, in here that I could now go back and change and straighten out exactly the way I want them to be. My words are used correctly. They're used in context, which, if I were to take this and use it on the test, I could say, okay, boy, what's the definition for indomitable? Well, it's used in this story as the indomitable beast, known as Gothmog, lurched forward out of the crevice. Well, that sounds to me like, this beast is unbeatable, it is very large, very powerful, strong. And, it's not going to be exactly what the definition is. Mainly because, that's not allowed. But it's going to give you some clues, some hints to get that, to match that word, if you're guessing to the best of your ability. Better than not having this for sure. Gandalf took great caution as he shuffled silently through the dungeon. Okay, if I would add that word in here, he's kind of tiptoeing would have been a much better word, right? Tiptoeing, which tells you, gives you hints as to what caution is. Splendid brilliance of light. Okay. Now, even though these are the 5 vocab words, there were some decent vocab words in the story as well that, notice here I wanted to add something in front of darkness. Should you be doing that? Yeah, you are trying to write the best story possible. So, this doesn't have to take all night. I'm not sure how long this video is going to be, but I did a lot of talking on top of it. When it comes right down to just writing your story, you could probably get it done in 15 or 20 minutes. And again, you're going to have from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, even some time on Friday if you wait that long, which I do not advise you to do. Get this done ahead of time so that you can reread it, study it, and practice those words. Because, a story like this, if your written test, if the written test was, say, 15 points, and you got a, let's say a 12 out of 15. Normally, that would be, what, a B minus, somewhere in that range. But remember, this gets added to the vocab story. So if this is 15 points, then that means this has to be 15 points this week as well, because it's 50%, 50%. Okay? And this story, you're looking at a 15 out of 15. Now what do you have? Instead of a 12 out of 15, you have a 27 out of 30, which I think went up from a B minus to an A minus. So again, this helps your grade as well if you put in the time and the effort to do it. You're more than likely to do better on the written test, and this boosts your grade overall.